Welcome to the National Women's Fitness Academy podcast. We're here to talk about women's health, female hormones, body image, and all things health and fitness.
Hello girls, and welcome to another episode of the Women's Fitness Academy's podcast. I'm your host, Siggy, one of the WFA's educators and also a women's online coach. Now, I hope wherever you are in the world, you are doing well, you are happy, and you are active. In today's episode, I have a very special guest with me. I've personally had the absolute pleasure to work with her, to be mentored by her, and to call her a real true friend. So girls, please welcome Kayla Lee.
Oh, what an introduction. Thank you. I'm so excited to be here.
I'm excited to have you here. It's going to be a good podcast. The last time we spoke, it was about all different things about, what was it, like the masculine, feminine energies, but it started with training and it just flew onto like all these different avenues. So maybe today's chat will flow into there as well. Now, before we start chatting about fitness things, Kayla, can you please tell our listeners, a little bit about who you are, what you do, and most importantly, what's your favorite food and why?
Oh, can we start with that one?
Yes.
100% sushi and ice cream, so I can't just have one. It's the combo.
Together?
Yeah. You start with the sushi and then you don't even have to start with the sushi. You can start with ice cream first.
Yeah.
Always. So we'll get the most important question out of the way first. But otherwise, I'm Kayla. I'm a physio. I have a background in exercise and sports science. I have been a coach since a long time. 2012 maybe. Yeah. So my second year of uni, that's when I started getting into personal training. So I was going through my training at uni, and as a really good adjunct to that was to get my Cert 3 and 4 and become a coach and a trainer all through while I was still studying my uni. I've absolutely loved sports, like all sorts of sports, since I was really young. Obviously been really active and just kind of, I guess, almost like fell into what I'm doing now, I suppose. I thought I was going to go down the nutrition route and become like nutrition dietitian, but physio just happened. Like I got into the degree and here we are now. Educating on all things women's training.
Yes, and what a journey it has been. In terms of you studying and becoming a coach and during your journey of being a physio, what led you to go more towards that path instead of the nutrition side of things?
It's really funny because when I had a personal trainer when I was I started at the gym maybe when I was 15, 16-ish. And so, I had a personal trainer. I didn't know how to move, how to lift. It doesn't sort of come naturally. You got to learn the technique, which, obviously takes a while, can be frustrating. But he was always like to me, oh, you're going to become a coach. You're going to become a trainer. Like, you love this. It's like your passion. And I was like, oh, I don't know. I don't really know what I want to do. Like, all through school, I was kind of like, oh, maybe I'm going to be a lawyer or something like that.
You'd be a good lawyer.
Do you reckon? I don't know. Just like a completely different path, but I don't like confrontation, so I don't know if I would make a good lawyer. So really how I sort of chose between like the nutrition and the physio was a lot of my friends that were doing exercise and sports science with me really wanted to get into physio. And, as I was doing that degree, I was speaking to a lot of people. They're like, what are you going to do with it? Because once you have exercise and sports science, it's like, what do you really do with that? What do you what can you really do with that degree? It's like more sort of like research side of things. And otherwise it's an avenue to go into like exercise phys or something else physio. or nutrition. And a lot of people were just like, go the physio route, go the physio route. And I was like, okay. So I just kind of like put both down, and I actually missed out on the nutrition. I was planning, or I really wanted to, when I first applied for uni, do a combined degree in sports science and nutrition, but I missed out on that. So I guess it was just sort of one of those meant to be things where I just applied, and luckily I got in, and a lot of my friends didn't, unfortunately. And so I was kind of like, well, I've been given this amazing opportunity that a lot of other people would kill for. Like, I should probably go for it, because, you know, even before I started, I was still unsure. But then just learning all about the human body and how it moves and all that, it was just fascinating. So, you know, it's one of those things where I just fell into it and it just kind of worked out. So yeah, I'm really lucky.
So good. I wouldn't necessarily say it's luck. I think it was kind of like the right way, like the right path for you to go to, because these days, for those who don't know, Kayla also has an online platform for women's education, but it's also for male trainers as well. And her jam is literally strength training and biomechanics. And when I mentioned before, I've had the pleasure of actually working with Kayla herself when I had certain back issues, and she mentored me around the structure of strength training and all sorts. Now, when we're looking at strength training, I know your outlook towards it is very similar to mine, how women should train differently to men. Can you like elaborate a little bit more about that?
Yeah, sure. There are a lot of differences when training men and women, and you know, one of them is going to be structural. That's kind of, I guess, one of the first places. We could go into like the physiology as well, different, you know, hormones and things at play, but the first thing I guess I sort of talk about is our structural differences. So women need to be structured differently, basically for reproduction, right? Like, we have the role of growing and birthing children, and so our structure needs to account for that. So we need a lot more space around our midsection. As a baby grows, our uterus expands, we need to have that room. So we do have these pelvises that are wider, they're more circular, that they sit a lot lower, they're a lot flatter, and our rib cages actually end a lot higher. So we have, I guess, less structure sort of around our spine, and that can be one of the reasons why, Siggy, like we need more stability around our core to be able to hold that, like that smaller waist that we have. So we need more of that like functional ability, you know, around our spine and around our core, because there's not as much structure there. And so I guess that's like one of the first things. But then having this structure of the pelvis is going to also change the alignment of our knees as well. So, you know, we have this wider pelvis, whereas it comes down, you know, to meet our knees. This is called the Q angle, or the quadriceps angle. And so, you know, for example, when we're squatting, things like that, doing certain exercises, because our knees come in a lot more, we need to change, you know, some of the exercises up, or adjust them, I should say, so that we're not putting too much pressure through certain structures of our knees, and, you know, basically causing an injury, or, you know, these small niggles and things we might have. So there are a few cues that that you often hear given to men for, say, like squats and deadlifts and things like that, but they may not necessarily be the right cues for women. And that first one is going to be like the knees out in a squat, basically, because, you know, our knees anatomically already sit a little bit in, and really like shoving your knees out might not be the best cue, especially for new, like beginners. Like if you're teaching your clients how to squat, and, you know, she's a woman and you keep just going knees out, knees out, knees out, and you're finding she's not getting it, I really prefer to cue from the hips and cue that like spreading the floor, like that screwing the feet into the floor, like that external rotation moment. Because what that's going to do, the main thing that we're looking to do with knees out is basically that, is to create this lateral stability of the hip and the pelvis so that we don't see a knee caving in, because we don't want that knee to cave in. But knees out for women with an anatomical neutral that her knees are already a little bit in, it can get frustrating and it can, like, you know, overcompensate in certain ways. So yeah, those are a couple of the considerations I like to make, as well as I spoke about the rib cage before. Having a smaller rib cage and a little bit more rounded, you know, puts our shoulder in a different position when we're lifting in certain positions. So I'm not sure if many people have heard of like the scapular plane or being in scaption, but that can be a little bit different, like rather than having your arm out to the side if you're doing certain exercises like a lateral raise or a shoulder press, just bringing it a little bit forward so that you're keeping your shoulder blade, you know, in line with your rib cage, or sort of like stable on your rib cage, is really important too. So yeah, they're just a couple of the anatomical considerations, I guess, that I look at, and the differences between men and women.
Such good differences, because previously to training with you, I used to just do lateral raises at 90 degrees all the time. And I used to get this like niggle in my shoulder, and I'll be like, what is this? Like, why is this happening? And then when we first started training, you're like, nah, instead of the 90, head over slightly to that 45, 30 degree angle. And that was a game changer. Like no niggles, no irritation through the shoulder. So it just shows you how, as a woman, we're, as you mentioned, we're structurally different to a man. So we should be training with what we have instead of, you know, doing something incorrectly, like the knees out example that you gave before. Makes a huge, huge difference. But also in regards to strength training, I know we're very big on monitoring it with your menstrual cycle as well. And I'm a very big believer that we need to work with what we have instead of against it. So what would you say is your method around, you know, helping a woman who has, I wouldn't say severe, but like does come across, you know, those symptoms of PMS before her menstrual cycle with strength training?
Yeah, so a really big topic as well. First of all, like I would sort of say that, you know, if you are having severe premenstrual symptoms, to get that checked out, because it's not like it is really common, but it's not necessarily normal, and to see like what the hormones are doing, and where their levels are sort of at as well. But in terms of someone who has like a healthy, regular cycle, there are fluctuations over the month that we need to take into account. Obviously, that's not going to be the case for women on birth control if they're taking exogenous sources of hormones. So that's like another caveat if you're sort of thinking about adapting your client's training around their menstrual cycle. But in terms of adjusting programming, like I don't necessarily program for around the menstrual cycle, but I definitely make the considerations depending how each individual client feels, because each client is going to experience their menstrual cycle differently, and they also might experience it differently month to month as well. So basically, you know, really speaking to your client, and this is the biggest thing with you know, with female trainers. I think women trainers or female trainers are so important in the industry because we understand each other, whereas, you know, a lot of male trainers might not necessarily know this stuff. So I think women are really good at empathizing with their clients because they go through a menstrual cycle themselves, and they may have been through some of these experiences. So in terms of like the different phases, you know, usually or previously, I guess that menstruation phase, that bleeding phase, was kind of seen as like a time where maybe you shouldn't train as hard. But, you know, given that all our hormones are actually quite low during this time, or they're coming down off that premenstrual high, they're kind of coming down. You know, you might have a few days where you feel a bit yuck. But, you know, as they start to level out, we actually have quite a similar physiology to a male, basically, where they're just stable. So it can actually be a good time to train, a good time to, you know, start increasing your intensity if you're feeling up to it. Whereas again, like caveat, if they're really heavy bleeds, if someone is experiencing, you know, symptoms from endometriosis or things like that, then, you know, it can be quite uncomfortable for them. And then we can make adjustments to their programming. Maybe they're just, you know, taking some time off the gym and going for walks or doing some gentle exercise. And then, you know, as we sort of enter that later follicular phase where the estrogen is starting to rise just before ovulation, everything's going to peak. It is usually correlated with higher amounts of energy in women. So we are able to push a little bit harder. Maybe we want to, you know, really sort of go for it. In saying that, though, some women do experience like feeling watery or bloated around that ovulation period. And there is also a higher risk of injury due to estrogen's role
huge one
in this phase. Yeah. I think with you it was more so just before your period you were getting you noticed back pain, and then you were like, okay, I need to pull it back a little bit.
But that ovulation period is so important for women to understand. I've read some studies that they're also quite known for ACL injuries around that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, definitely. So I think they looked at AFL players where like there is a high risk of ACL anyway with AFL because it's quite an explosive sport. But yeah, because of that Q angle, again, because of estrogen's role in ligament laxity, we can see higher risk of knee injuries during this time. So what I sort of look at is if someone, you know, is feeling good and they're looking good and they're looking stable, then like go for it. But also we can have options if someone is feeling like, you know, maybe they're feeling a bit unstable or their ligaments are a little bit more lax during this time. Swapping up the exercise, like say what's programmed is a low bar squat or a high bar squat or some sort of back squat, and you know they're feeling a little bit unstable, they're not feeling really strong, the weight's feeling a bit heavy on their back, or the technique isn't quite right, then you know you have the option to chuck them on a leg press and just go really hard. A leg press, you're going to be a lot safer, and you can actually like increase your output and go really hard during that time. So it's not necessarily like change or like making a program sort of around the cycle, but just having these considerations and these things in mind. And then, you know, as ovulation finishes, we do see a drop in estrogen and progesterone starts to rise. So during this phase, you know, women can, it's kind of like a roller coaster of emotions. We can feel tired, we might feel sluggish, we might be irritable, moody, all these sorts of things. Again, some women don't experience many symptoms at all, and so therefore, you know, it is safe because estrogen's role is blocked during that phase by progesterone. You know, it's safe to go hard if she's feeling up to it. If she's not, then, you know, maybe we bring it back a little bit. It's all just about like speaking to your individual client, because we can look at the research and say this is happening and this is happening, but you know, every woman is different. She's gonna have different considerations and experience her cycle differently.
I agree with that totally. And again, research is useful for us to have a better understanding of what's going on, but experience and having awareness of your own symptoms is, you know, it's going to be the most powerful thing for you to understand your cycle, but as long to help with your strength training as well. And that way you'll start training with it instead of, against it. There's been so many times that I've coached women and they'd hit that, plateau, which is not really plateau, but it's that week before their period where they feel their weakest and they're like, Siggy, I just can't push the weight I did last week. And I'm like, well, yeah, like, let's sit back. Let's see what's happening. Oh yeah, you're 5 days away from your period. How are you feeling? What's going on? Like, are you feeling hungry? Are you feeling weaker? So yeah, just tapping a little bit more into that biofeedback for them to have an understanding is a huge matter. And I also love how you mentioned that as women, we're more empathetic. We have the understanding around the menstrual cycle. So I think as women, we feel more comfortable speaking to other women about it. But I do feel, and I know you agree with me on this, that it is important for more male coaches these days to have this understanding or have this information in the background, how to help their female clients.
Yeah, definitely. I think it's really empowering for women to know, because there isn't, like we spoke about the research, and there is a little bit of research, but there's really not a whole lot. And so, yeah, I think it's really empowering that these days there's so much more education around it, like, courses like WFA as well, like they are educating on this type of thing, and that there are differences between men and women. And so it's just, yeah, I think it's empowering for women to know that there are differences rather than thinking that there's something wrong with them or thinking that they're not making progress, because that can be one of the most disheartening things, is just working really, really hard and then feeling like you're not making any progress, or like you're almost going backwards for, maybe a week or two of the cycle. So yeah, and again, like, yeah, with male coaches, like definitely I think there does need to be a lot more education for male coaches, and those that are open to it. I think most of the industry, or like majority of the industry right now, is probably made up of male coaches, and majority of the industry is also female clients looking for coaches. So yeah, the impact that a male coach who knows this kind of stuff will have on his clients is going to be really powerful. And yeah, just really good for the industry as a whole, and for, I guess, making men a little bit more empathetic to what we go through every month.
Definitely. And just having that open conversation with your coach to, for them to better understand you, but for you to also have that honest report, instead of you trying to like bash against the wall constantly, like battling whatever it is that's happening with that menstrual cycle, but working towards, that goal with their help as well. I think that's a big one. What would you say your biggest lesson that you've learned around this, like with strength training and, facilitating around the menstrual cycle as well?
I think more so it's just been eye-opening how many women don't know this. Like, we were speaking just before we started recording about, like, we weren't taught this stuff in school, and a lot of women are almost unaware even of their own bodies, unaware of what's going on in their own bodies. Like, classic example, like I was maybe 17 and I got put on the pill as a treatment for irregular periods, right? And like I got my period late, right? I was sporty growing up, had late period, irregular periods. Like I hadn't had time for my cycle to actually mature, like that communication between the ovaries and the brain and like the nervous system and all this interplay in our bodies. It hadn't had time to mature into a regular cycle before it was already shut down by these exogenous hormones on, with the birth control, with the pill. So I was giving my body these, I guess, like fake hormones, these synthetic hormones that shut down my real natural cycle, my real natural hormones for however long I was on it, 5 years or something. And so it hadn't had that time to mature. And it's just, it is really, these days there's so much more education around it, but there's still not enough. And I think it does need to be taught to us in schools. Like, we do need to know what's actually going on more so in our bodies. So I guess that was probably my biggest lesson, was that just how so many people don't know this. And that's why I guess, I do what I do, and you do what you do, and we all do, like, all us coaches are doing what we do as well, because as coaches, we really just want to help people, right? And it probably started with our own journey. Like, it probably started with what we didn't know, and progressed from there, basically. And we don't want other people to go through the same things that we had to go through.
Totally.
So I think it's
I love that. And I love that you mentioned also that you were put on the pill to regulate your cycle. And our listeners need to understand that your birth control pill, it doesn't regulate your cycle. As Kayla said, you're placing synthetic hormones into your body that it's perceiving to look as it's regular, but it doesn't actually regulate your period. And that period you think you're getting on the dot every 28 days because you finish that pill and you go into the sugar pills, that's a withdrawal bleed. It's not a real menstrual period. And while we're on the topic of that, I think our listeners need to also understand that our mental health is linked very tightly to our menstrual health as well. And I don't know about you, Kayla, but that's something that I wasn't taught about in school. So when I was a young 13, 14-year-old girl going through these motions before I actually went on the birth control, I was going through phases of being really moody, but being very happy, and then weird bleeds, but then really weird body aches, and no one had answers for me. I didn't have the answers. So, as you can imagine, as a young girl, you have all these symptoms, but you just don't know how to put them all together because you just don't get taught that. And I think that's a huge lesson for everyone to start having a little bit of better understanding that it all links in together.
Yeah. So, I mean, was the answer in the end to be put on the pill, Sig?
Yes.
Or to be put on some sort of, yes.
Love my mom, but again, you don't know what to do at that time. So you think, you're just going to go on the pill and regulate your period. So here I was about 15 and went on the pill, and I was on it for 10 years.
Yeah. And so, like you were saying before, that meant that that withdrawal bleed, that's not really a period. A lot of the times we think that that's a sign of a normal cycle. And, because oftentimes it's the menstruation part of a cycle is, they think it's the main event, but the main event is actually ovulation, which, we can't see. We have signs and symptoms for ovulation, but the release of that egg actually means you're fertile, actually means you're making enough estrogen. And after ovulation, progesterone has massive, calming effects on the nervous system. And if you're not ovulating, you're not producing progesterone, and your nervous system is not getting those calming effects of progesterone. And not only that, because a lot of young girls will think, I don't want to get pregnant right now, I don't need to menstruate. But the effects of those hormones, further down the track, estrogen, super important for maintaining muscle mass, for maintaining bone mineral density. progesterone really important for mental health and cognition and, you know, memory and all these sorts of things. So they don't just play a role in reproduction, they play a role in all aspects of health. And, you know, I think that's another thing that we're not taught. And, you know, our mums, like, you know, bless them, they were trying to help us. And it's not necessarily their fault because they probably didn't know either.
And their mums probably did that for them as well.
Yeah, and it's not even the mums, like it's also the doctors. And the doctors, you know, we could get into a whole discussion, which we probably don't need to, about like the pharmaceutical
maybe not today.
and all that sort of stuff. But yeah, like oftentimes, like if you have an irregular cycle, it's a sign that there's something up, like there's something that's not quite right. Maybe, you know, young girls a lot of the time are probably not eating enough, and if they're doing excessive amounts of exercise, they may be deficient in certain minerals, certain micronutrients. So that's where nutrition comes in, and nutrition is really important. And you know, I spoke about like I wanted to do nutrition. I sort of come like full circle where like I always come back to it. Like, you know, it's like, okay, I want to do a nutrition course now. And then now it's like, I'm just doing a lot of research into like micronutrition and supplements and like all that sort of stuff. So yeah, it's a whole rabbit hole. Lots of different things.
It is. And you know what? In a way, it's a blessing because there's so much information out there now. And again, you can be quite impactful by the right information, but there's a lot more valuable people, coaches, professional, like health professionals out there that can give proper advice for, you know, the younger girls who once upon a time we were. So hopefully they make, you know, a decision based on what they want, but not by someone who's telling them what to do. Now, speaking of decisions, what would you say is the best decision you've made in your life so far?
Oh, that is a big question.
I know, we're diving deep.
Because like I was all ready to be like, oh, you know, like everyone can make their own decision in terms of whether they go on birth control or not. Like sometimes that is the right way to go for some people at some time. And, you know, for some people it is. And for some people, you know, maybe if they're suffering, and I'm going off on a tangent, I'm like trying to avoid this question while I think about it. But you know, if someone has heavy bleeds and they need some sort of progesterone to help like lighten the bleeds or something like that, you know, that's their decision. And it's just about having both sides of the story, I think, like knowing what the consequences are of both sides. So anyway, going back to the big question, best decision, you know what, like I feel like all the best decisions have kind of not been decisions. I feel like all the best things that have happened have kind of been, they just kind of happened, if that kind of makes sense. Like I could say, you know, I was deciding between, you know, for example, like being a lawyer or doing physio, you know, but like that decision was kind of I don't know, like that's a really, really tough question because like some of the decisions that I've made, and you know, like the backstory to these, like haven't worked out really well in my favor, but like they did work out. Like I feel like everything kind of just works out how it's supposed to. I know that's kind of like a little bit like woo-woo and like
love woo-woo, but like love it, but it's true. It's true, you know. One thing leads you to do something, and whether it worked or not, it would lead you to another pathway.
And I know you believe that too, so
this is my jam. I love this.
I just feel like the decisions were kind of made for me. It wasn't anything that I kind of had to really debilitate what was right and what was not. If it was meant to happen, it was going to happen either way, kind of thing. And anytime I kind of felt resistance to a certain way, it just steered me away from that decision, if that kind of makes sense. So I think they were kind of made subconsciously rather than consciously.
Yeah, I love that. And while we're on the topic of that, let's say there's someone who's listening to us right now and they're feeling a little bit stuck in their job or in their decision of making a career change, and they're considering entering, the health and the fitness industry. What advice would you give them to have the best chance of success?
I would say just keep learning. Keep learning, keep upskilling yourself, like seek out people who are doing what you want to do and model off them, or who you align with really well. Because that's how you'll grow, and that's how you'll continue to grow, and that's how you separate yourself from other people. So, learning is lifelong. Like, I went through 5 years of university. I've been a physio for 6 years now. I don't know everything, and I know there's, like, the more that I learn, the more that I know I don't know. So it's like, just you never stop. You stop learning, you die.
Yeah, and we're not dying anytime soon. We're just evolving, growing, becoming what we want to become. I love that. It's so true, because as you said, like, if you don't learn, you just feel stuck. You're stagnant. There's no future in it. So I think that's a really great way of putting it to someone who's wanting to enter the industry. And like you said, reaching out to other coaches or other people in the industry and ask them what they're doing, how they can help you. I think that's the best way of learning, to be honest, aside from, reading books and listening to podcasts, but really investing in yourself, to invest in someone who can teach you the ropes of the way.
100%.
I love that. Cool, girls. Let's wrap it up there, because otherwise we'll probably dive into like another little hole of like the law of attraction, or like who knows where the conversation will go. But before we wrap it up, Kayla, please tell our listeners where they can find you.
So probably best place, or easiest, most accessible, would be Instagram. So at Kayla Lee Physio. Yeah, that's probably the best place where people find people these days, right?
Yes, Instagram is the place to be. Awesome.
Yeah.
Well, girls, I hope you enjoyed today's podcast and you enjoyed the conversation that Kayla and I spoke about. If you have any further questions, just DM us privately and tag the Women's Fitness Academy Fitness Academy page on Instagram. And we hope you have a wonderful day wherever you are.